What up? Salvador Briggman here. Welcome back to the Crowdfunding Demystified podcast, hailing in from Miami, Florida today. Wherever it is that you are, if you're listening to this podcast on the way to work, if you're listening as you're commuting, you're listening as you're going for a run, or you're cleaning your room, whatever you're doing, I hope that you take a little bit of time today just to really digest some of the information which you're going to be receiving. So we're going to be going through a lot of tools, tactics, things that you should know when it comes to doing a crowdfunding campaign and seeing this through the lens of a different category. So I try to bring on a lot of different types of projects on this podcast. Today we're talking more about like tabletop games and that kind of category, but really you should see yourself in this kind of arena as, hey, I'm competing on Kickstarter with all these different types of people, but at the same time, they're collaborators. They're sharing with me what's working. That's the whole point of this podcast, is to really demystify how these campaigns are getting funding, what you can emulate, whether you're in a product category or like a product design or a gadget or a gizmo. You're really trying to take as much as possible, really suck the marrow, if you will, out of these different stories and apply some of these tricks to your campaign. So that's, for example, I've had someone be like, Sal, I didn't even know this thing about stretch goals, right? When they're listening to maybe a tabletop game podcast and they're having a physical product, like, wow, I can do stretch goals on my campaign. I'm like, that's exactly what it's about. It's like cross-pollination of ideas. And that's really what I try to do with the podcast. So today, you're learning from a creator who attracted more than $430,000 from more than 4,600 backers. In addition, this is not their first campaign. So they've actually kind of made a business of publishing different campaigns on Kickstarter. At the time I'm looking at this, they've created 10 campaigns on Kickstarter under their main brand name, but they've been incredible about sharing their entire process going into this. So if you want to learn how to turn this into a business, if you want to learn how to actually do multiple campaigns, if you want to understand the mechanics behind a successful campaign, I think that these guys have almost boiled it down to a science. And I say that obviously there's many other guests as well who come with these different formulas. So there are many different takes, and I hope that at the end of this episode, you've taken away some good techniques, some strategy going into the campaign, and hopefully, if nothing else, you at least know this is possible. Other people just like you are crushing it. Other people just like you are raising money every single week when it comes to Kickstarter, crowdfunding, Indiegogo, etc. There's no reason why you can't be that next success story. In addition, I've been getting more and more feedback from various channels. So now I'm actually on Instagram, getting a lot of people hitting me up on Instagram under my name, Salvador Briggman, and different channels that I have out there. My YouTube, obviously, which is now growing. I think we're almost at 40,000 subscribers, which is like insane. This is crazy, guys. 40,000 people. That's like so many people, right? That's wild. But whatever it is, I've been getting lots and lots more people who are like, Sal, you talk a lot about marketing techniques, but one of the things you haven't talked so much about is PR. Like, how do you get journalists writing about you? How do you get into press release? How do you get people actually writing media stories about you, covering you? How do you really use this campaign and leverage it for a media success story? So I was thinking a lot about that, and I've kind of revamped and recreated this course that I want to share with you. And it's a free course that walks you through exactly what you got to do in order to get into the media with your campaign. So these are basically hacks, tricks, whatever words you want to use, in order to actually get journalists to write about you, to create a media firestorm, and that way leverage this campaign as not only just like an e-commerce, if you will, flooding of orders or pre-order or whatever words you want to use, but it's really there as well to elevate you, your brand, and to make this much bigger, make this a media event. If that sounds like that's something that's interesting to you, go and check out this free course I'm about to mention at crowdcrux.com/PR. That link is crowdcrux.com/PR, crowdcrux.com/PR. And I think you'll actually be surprised by some of the things that you will learn in that free course. So I hope that you enjoy that. In addition, my other quick link for you is that if you want to just stay up to date with the new stuff that I'm doing when it comes to new techniques that I'm discovering, new news related to different platforms and crowdfunding that you should be aware of, resources, like all that kind of stuff, I try to condense that into my Killer Crowdfunding Tips newsletter. These are kind of like just like nuggets of gold, or a very quick read once a week where you can actually just get very quickly primed and understand what's going on in the crowdfunding industry, some of the stuff you should be aware of, some of the things you maybe didn't know about, really just an easy way to stay informed. If that sounds interesting to you, go to this link I'm about to mention and you can hop on the Killer Crowdfunding Tips newsletter. That link is crowdcrux.com/newsletter. That link is crowdcrux.com/newsletter, crowdcrux.com/newsletter. Without further ado, let's hop into today's podcast episode and discover how this creator has created literally a repeatable strategy and how their most recent campaign has raised over $430K from 4,600 backers. And it's coming up right after this. If you're worried about the fulfillment and shipping part of your Kickstarter campaign when it comes to getting out all those perks and rewards to your backers, rest assured, I've put together a complete Kickstarter fulfillment and shipping checklist for you, and it's free. This is sponsored by the folks at Fulfillrite, and they thought that you should have this checklist as part of your arsenal going into a crowdfunding campaign. If you want to get instant access to this checklist and it's free, you can go to fulfillrite.com/checklist. Again, that is fulfillrite.com/checklist. Fulfillrite.com/checklist. Just go to that link and you can download it immediately. Hey guys, welcome back to the Crowdfunding Demystified podcast. Today we have a team which is responsible for helping a campaign raise over $430K for a really great project. More than 4,600 backers. This is for Humblewood Tales, a book of adventures. I'll let this team tell you a little bit more about that. We have a member here. We have Ricardo on the podcast. Ricardo, welcome to the show.
Hi, Salvador. Thanks for having me on here today.
Definitely, man. So do you think we can maybe get started? You're just kind of describing to the listeners a little bit about what you do as a publisher and also this recent project that you completed.
So I'm the owner and founder of Hit Point Press. And when it comes to the work that I'm doing specifically for a crowdfunding campaign is focusing on the creation of it, like the actual physical assets, talking with the teams that are building the projects themselves and figuring out what kind of different types of rewards we can offer, the kind of things we want to like, how we want to word that language, as well as like the overall marketing, figuring that out, discussing with my team how we want to effectively build an audience, attract those people to come to the campaign, and in the end, engage with the campaign and back it.
Got it. And for Hit Point Press, so do you guys do also other things outside of the crowdfunding realm when it comes to publishing?
So a lot of what we do, actually, a majority of our company is based on crowdfunding. So most of our projects have actually been crowdfunded to this point. And we build out our pipeline based on future crowdfunding events because they're very much an event that people want to come and engage with. And we haven't really tried other models like just doing straight pre-orders on our site yet or right to like stores. We find this allows a lot more hype when it comes to a new project. And it involves the community a lot more than other methods that we've been looking at.
So just to kind of understand more, so from the publisher angle, so from what I understood, and you can definitely correct me here. So like a publisher will work with artists or a gameplay expert to kind of pull together a game and like publish it and be kind of along the lines of project management and those things. Is that how you identify, or is it different, the role there?
The role can vary depending on the project itself. In a lot of cases, these projects that are coming to our table from other creators are being built completely by those creators, and they're coming to us for assistance with like, how do we market? How do we talk about this? How do we get the stuff produced? What are we dealing with like freight and shipping and getting the product to the final user? And so we leverage the experience that we have and the audience that we have to help support those creators and in some case help them with paying for marketing and helping them get a bigger reach than they normally could.
Okay, so helping as a marketing agency and then also a bit with logistics.
Yeah, we'll also give recommendations in terms of like the content that's being seen. So like we'll do a review of the book. We'll talk about the design of it. If there's anything that we think stands out that could be adjusted or updated, because we want to be able to have everybody make a good product in the end.
For sure, for sure. Awesome, man. What were you doing before you got started with this?
So before Hit Point Press was founded, it was actually, we started off as a accessories company for Magic the Gathering, where we made third-party gaming tokens for that space.
Love that game.
Yeah, it's an amazing game. And I actually started that up because my other company, which is a digital agency, was just getting into building e-commerce sites. And I said, well, if I'm going to, as a graphic designer by trade, if I'm going to need to learn how to build e-commerce sites, I might as well just spin one up, see how it works, see how I can start to market it, so that way we could offer it to our clients. That business ended up actually doing pretty well, and we decided to like start advancing into other spaces because we got our own printers and cutters and say, okay, well, one of my colleagues said, hey, Wizards has a open gaming license and we can explore that content and build there as well. So that's pretty much how we like transition from site devs to now making 5th edition content and running campaigns.
And for you, is that something you've been enjoying your entire life, is like working on games and that kind of content, or what really started with that? How'd that start?
So yeah, a lot of it does stem from games. Actually, the agency, before it became an agency, was building video games for iOS and Facebook. The problem was we didn't know how to market. And after a few years of trying, we ended up like pivoting what it was. But in reality, I still liked making games and wanting to develop those kinds of things. So, which is why when I had the opportunity to build a site, I went right back to making accessories for the games I love.
And you've been mentioning we. Do you have a team of people that you're working with? Do you have a co-founder, or what were you referring to there?
So by we, I mean my team. We have about 20 employees right now who are building a variety of different content, to writers, to artists, to graphic designers. We have our own warehouse, which we actually do our own fulfillment currently from. And so we manage a lot of the concept to fulfillment when it comes to our products, which is, I hear, is pretty uncommon, but it gives us a good idea of like how all the different like cogs work. So that way, when we approach it and talk to other people about how our experiences are, we have a pretty good sense of what's happened in the market.
Did you always see yourself being an entrepreneur? I see a lot of graphic designers who really enjoy the art piece, but the business side is obviously different. Have you always seen yourself kind of doing your own business like that?
Yeah, I would say so. Basically, after I got out of graphic design school, I had actually been working with like a lot of clients firsthand, and I liked the ability of like kind of controlling the work that I was doing and being able to build what I kind of wanted from that. Like my last official job, I believe, was working at Tim Hortons coffee bar in Canada, and from there, I just started trying to make little businesses or grow teams to try to build different projects, because that's what really interested me, was just trying to build something, see what stuck, and try to run with it.
Yeah, and that's obviously quite challenging, right? Being able to build a team of people and having people work together, particularly now that you can do that like from multi-state or international, right? That's really kind of cool in the way that works. So with this current campaign that you just had funded for Humblewood Tales, maybe you can just tell us like bite size a little bit about that.
So Humblewood Tales was actually, the book itself was digital content that we had released after the initial Humblewood book, but it never really collected together as a tome. There was over 200 pages of content that we have built over the years and decided, hey, you know what? We've got some really amazing stuff. Our audience is asking for more stuff while we're building the next book in the series. We can release this as a nice little side thing while we're preparing for the next big campaign for our project. We hit the goals that we wanted to with it, so we're pretty well received. And because the book is pretty much like 95% complete, we're just finishing off some design stuff. It's going to be a very quick turnaround for us to get this out to the audience, which is one of the things we really wanted to strive with as we grow as a company, is being more complete with our projects. So that way it's just like, it goes right into production, fulfillment. Okay, on to the next project. And it'll grow the trust that we get from our customers, because then they're not waiting for 2 years for something to come out. It's like a 6-month time span.
And who do you feel like is the ideal consumer for this one, or the person who's really backing this and like a raving fan? What would they tend to be into?
I would assume that the people going for this one would have already engaged with the first book. We are building it so that you don't have to have the first book to engage with this one. The big target was just re-engaging the fans that were currently existing in the space and saying, hey, we've got this, we've got more coming, and allowing us to have that communication, because it had been a couple of years since the first book in that series came out.
What makes you say yes when someone like brings this project to you? I assume you have someone who comes to you and is like, this would make an incredible next edition or next book. What makes you say yes, or how do you evaluate that?
Well, so for Humblewood specifically, it was actually an idea that our team created based on, we had seen some art that a colleague of ours, Alicia Hannigan, was doing. And we said, hey, we'd love to make some reference material for 5th edition based on this, create some stat blocks, and it ended up turning into this entire world. A lot of it for our projects, we have a fun idea, we try to run with it, and if people are interested, we figure that out by sending out play tests and engaging with our audience. We decide, okay, this is something people really want, and then we go try to build that. When it comes to external projects, there's a variety of different factors when it comes to evaluating those projects, but a big part is our team will review the content to make sure that the content is sound, that it's not offensive, that we think it's fun to play, and that the stuff that's being provided is engaging. The art doesn't need to be AAA art, but is it fun and engaging, and does it bring like a lot of emotion and like creativity to how people will play? And that's how we try to approach those things. So we try to see how those people bring the table to us. And then also a big part of that is those creators, and talking to them, going to the meetings and seeing if this is something that we can work with on those projects.
So with this project being more internal, where do you usually find inspiration comes from? Is it actually just looking at other games and kind of getting inspiration there? Is it an idea that you have? Like, where do you usually find inspiration comes from?
Oddly enough, a lot of times it's like in company jokes where we're playing around with something, and then we're like, No, we actually really like this idea. And so we'll try to explore it or we'll try to build upon it. We've had some cases where team members will have built their own thing and then bring it to the team and see if this is something we'd be interested in exploring. But a big part is mostly either when it comes to like the games that we're building, it's usually an in-joke that turns into actually a product that we really enjoy actually wanting to build and play because we're having fun engaging with that when we do our game and play. And then we're like, well, if we're having fun with this, we want to see if other people would as well.
I can imagine you got to be careful what you joke about then. Never know what's going to come to light. That's cool, man. Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And it sounds like that's almost even having a culture, right, with your staff to be willing to take a risk, to be willing to bring those kinds of ideas to you.
Oh, for sure. Right now, because of COVID, we're still working remote from each other. But on our Discord, we have active channels where people are posting their art or posting their fun ideas for monsters or things that they would love to see in the games that they're playing. And that allows us to communicate and engage with each other in terms of like what we used to do in-house when we played our in-house games and that kind of stuff.
Just hearing from you kind of talk about it, it sounds like one of the things that you're good at is identifying and building a community, right? What do you think really causes a community to form around some games or some bits of artwork that you're doing versus other ones that don't?
That's an interesting question because like I think a big part of what I talk to people when they're coming to like publish is like, especially when it comes to 5th edition content, people engaging in 5th edition Kickstarters have a really good sense of what they're getting in rules wise. So a really big part is how will people feel? How will people play? What is it they're looking at when they come to this campaign that they're like, no, that's what I want to do. You have campaigns like Helena's Guide to Monster Hunting, which is basically you get a sense of like playing Monster Hunter on your PlayStation. Instead, you're going to get that in your role-playing game space where you get to hunt, craft, and build all your monsters and build your weapons with your colleagues and friends. Having that sense of what you want to do in the game is very strong and actually, I think, leans really well to people playing in the 5th edition space.
Okay, so almost having like that bedrock foundation of knowing what you want to play and some gameplay seems to help, right, when it comes to that.
Yeah, because like there will be a lot of people like, well, I want to build a thing on paladins or I want to build a thing that's like purely on rangers, but it's like, okay, well, what is the thing that's going to attract people to this? If it's just, I want ranger players, then you're giving a very narrow focus to what you're creating there. But if you're giving an entire world and allowing people to engage in that world, that's a way to get people started talking about that, talk about the monsters that exist in that location. So it's about having that flexibility.
So as a world, so that means kind of characters that are involved there, the different kind of moving elements, would you say, with a story and maybe your objective, those kinds of things?
Oh, for sure. Like when it comes back to Humblewood, we initially created just this small region for the first book. But when we saw the success of the first campaign, we thought out, okay, we were still finishing off the book and writing what we wanted to do there and decided that, okay, we need to consider this as a whole world, not just as a region, and started developing the idea of like, what are different clues and hints of things that come to light in the future that would help us to create a better story and also engage people, because you can always have mysteries that allow people to say, okay, but how does this get resolved? And even before your books will come out, people will try to create or develop things to kind of fit the mold until that does get resolved, but allows people to have something to talk about. If you're giving something that's finite and absolute, that means like you're, especially within this space, people very much want to be collaborative and build, and they want to build with you. So it's a matter of giving them that flexibility to say, you have this creativity, you have this world, there's lots of room for you to play.
So these different devices that you mentioned, for example, like having a mystery or having a bit of a fact that you embed, it kind of creates these little open loops, right? Increases curiosity. But just like kind of as it is, it's like, well, people can't build on it. There's no curiosity of what happens next, right? So it's almost like you're creating these opportunities for more curiosity.
Definitely. You have mysterious runes that aren't explained. They're there and present, and you might see them over time, and maybe parts of it gets explained over like the course of that initial book, and maybe it gets resolved in the next book as to what kind of thing was being dealt with there. Because it might not be relevant for the first book, but if you start reading the second book and you get that cipher that starts explaining this thing that you might have seen in a previous book, it feels like there's this big connected piece that people were probably not expecting. Our games are huge because of this thought of people have thought 50 steps ahead in terms of what they're developing to make this more cohesive and tangible world. instead of just kind of saying, oh, we're building one building and now we're going to build a tower on top of that. And then we're going to build another piece right off top of that instead of building a better foundation.
Really interesting. That would take a lot of Excel spreadsheets on my part, tracking all that. So one of the questions I've kind of been wondering, just hearing you talk, is a lot of the times I think it's great to be able to create this world. I think you have this all very well mapped out and thought out. But then someone's like, okay, how do I actually get people involved in that world? What is your approach there? Are you trying to build a fan base from scratch? Are you trying to go to existing fan bases and like let them know about this? How do you really involve people in that world?
So our benefit when coming to the first campaign for Humblewood was that we'd already been building an audience over multiple Kickstarters prior to this first campaign setting through the various accessories that we created. And people had trusted in what we were building and creating there. And because of the success of those projects, we were able to start, like I said, creating what the original Humblewood was. We created a play test that we were giving for free away to anybody who wanted to just download it from our website. And that way we could see what people's reactions were to it. And then we released a couple more documents over the course of the next few months to really kind of get their trust that we were working on it and developing it. And that way they knew that there was more content coming and that we were trusting them with that information. And then we got to see how many people are actually wanting to play as woodland creatures. Because we actually did a survey in the past of like saying, hey, what kind of content would you guys like to play and what are you interested in? And playing as woodland creatures, anthropomorphized stuff wasn't top on the list, but you wouldn't think that when you see how well the campaigns did. And it was a matter of like, people were used to not playing as those, but there was an audience that we weren't even tapping into that really wanted to play as these animals. So from our existing audience and to tap into new audiences, especially with a lot of the gorgeous art. And we actually went to events and had reference materials and cards that we were giving to people that linked back to those play tests. So we were trying to find lots of ways to like show people what they could play and how they could feel when they play those games.
So just to give the audience a little bit of context, so Ricardo has a bunch of different projects right now that are en route to go live, that are currently live. There's one here that you have that's like has over 600 followers, right, waiting for this to go live. What do you feel like is working right now really well when it comes to Kickstarter?
When it comes to Kickstarter, I think it's a big part, like I mentioned earlier, it's an event, right? It's people like watching campaigns and they also watching how well those campaigns do, especially if they're a part of them, right? Because we have this base goal, for example, a nice base goal is like $10,000. You hit that, but then you have all these other stretch goals that people want to achieve and unlock because it means they get some more content from the thing that they really are engaged with and they love. And that might mean that they're going to also help talk about it or promote it to people because they also want to see those goals get hit. And in a lot of cases, we found that as campaigns near their end, depending on where goals are, people will up their pledges to help kind of move things forward, which is not something you typically see from just like a regular pre-order. People are pooling together and chatting and discussing because this is an event. This is like, essentially, it's a gamified pre-release or pre-order for this product, which allows you to really engage more with the people you are having join the campaign. If you're able to talk with them on Discord and engage with them on there and all the different social media platforms, you can really start getting people to get this message of like what it is you're creating and how you can create with. Another benefit that I find from campaigns is that there's a lot of feedback that you can get from those people about things that they might want to see that you may not be offering. Like, hey, I'd love to get a GM screen. Do you have something like that? And we could take a look and see if it makes sense budget-wise. And if there's still time in the campaign and we're hitting all the goals we want, we might be able to include that at no additional cost to some backers. And then it allows them to feel rewarded for coming and chatting and making sure that we have that information.
Do you feel like there are any kinds of projects in your realm or your industry that aren't a good fit for Kickstarter?
And the thing is, I think a lot of projects are good for Kickstarter. It just depends on what it is you're building. Like I find that traditional publishing actually doesn't tend to perform well from what I understand. But if you have like a really big creator, like there was I think it was Sanderson did a really big book Kickstarter.
Yeah, massive.
Yeah, it was massive. And that is not typical. We know because we assisted in a book publishing. We hit 100,000. It was just like a regular book. And that was pretty uncommon in that space. It's great for a lot of projects. I don't see it being not great because it's a great way to also gauge interest in what you're building. Because if you have an idea and you're not sure about how well it'll do, even if you're just starting and have at least a decent concept, you're able to show what you're building, it'll show if there is merit in you continuing your project. So I wouldn't be hasty in crossing it out off the list. I think it's a great starting point because it even gives you that capital to keep going with your projects.
If you have a beginning creator that comes to you and is like, hey man, I'm trying to do this project. If you had one bit of advice that would give me the best potential of being successful, what would you tell them?
I would tell them they need to build their audience. And that's usually the first bit of advice I tell them is you need to build an audience. And because if nobody knows about the project that you're building, nobody's going to engage with it. For example, the first Kickstarter that we ever did, we prepared and built an audience we went on Reddit and we said, hey, we are going to send out physical samples of the reference cards we're making for this. If you want a free sample of a couple cards, here's a form. You can give us your mailing address and we'll just ship it to you. No expectations that you're going to back a Kickstarter or anything of that sort, but you're giving us your information for the purposes of building this audience and we'll give you some free product. We had over 500 people sign up to be a part of that list, which is why we were successful. It's not going to be the same for every person, but it's why we also put out free content, free PDFs for people to engage with so we can know who is actually interested and engaged a bit more in our product instead of just hoping that just by pushing out a campaign, people are going to find it. And actually, if I can, I want to add a quick second one. The quick second one is if you can get credit cards, because PPC marketing requires you to pay up front for a lot of those. And if you can, if there's companies that you're working with and you're getting a good return of say 1 to 4 or 1 to 5, it's something that you're happy to spend money into using credit cards because at the end of your campaign, you're going to get that money back. Pending that you have funded your campaign. So that's just a quick second.
What would you say the relationship is between having what you mentioned, this audience of like emails or however you want to build your list with Discord? Does that work hand in hand? Like why also have the Discord?
The Discord is very beneficial in terms of like a lot of support inquiries will be coming through there, or a lot of people will probably be engaging or finding ways to play or even sharing the things that they've created with your space, which is not something you get from a mailing list. A mailing list, tends to be more of a one-sided conversation where we talk about stuff that's going on. While on the Discord, someone can go in there and ask a dev, hey, I have a question about this thing, and we can answer that. Or, hey, I created this map for this region that doesn't have one, and people can share that. Or they're looking for games. And then that by going to a Hit Point Press Discord, that you'll be able to engage with other people who are engaging with Hit Point Press products. And so it makes a community there while the email marketing is more of a tool to allow people to know what you're building and creating. You can still do that on Discord, but I find it hits them in different ways.
There's so much talk, honestly, in this niche about like Kickstarter campaigns and crowdfunding. What do you feel like should be more discussed or that doesn't see enough light? Whether that's things that you're noticing that do well or tricks, or what do you feel like needs more spotlight, or what do you feel like should be discussed more when it comes to doing a Kickstarter or a crowdfunding campaign, where that's things that you've been noticing that are happening on the platforms, things that work well within your category, any kind of tricks, anything like that? What do you feel like should be discussed more?
I think the big part and the thing that gets a lot of people, and it didn't mention probably to death by now, but it's actually dealing with freight and dealing with shipping. And it's actually been a bit more of an issue since COVID started because shipping rates have ballooned quite a bit, and it's actually hurt a lot of creators because the rates aren't what they were charging people in their original campaigns. So you'll see now a lot of days that people won't charge the shipping in their campaign because it's so nebulous as to what those rates could be, and they don't want to sync what they're building just because the shipment went out a year later, or their shipping date's a year later, and the rates have almost doubled to that point. So the other thing too is because of freight and the massive demand that was caused over COVID, and also things like not the Panama Canal, the one in Egypt where, the
Suez Canal?
The Suez Canal. The way they had the blockage there, that caused so much delay and so many parcels couldn't be delivered on time, which caused this huge backlog of people needing shipping containers. And now there's people who can't get shipping containers. And so if I try to put a product to get onto a shipping container, I can book it today. And normally it would have been on a boat within a couple of weeks, but now it's in a boat in a couple months. And then from there, it takes when it would normally take a full month probably to get across the ocean, but now it's waiting at the port for another couple of weeks and before it gets onto a train. So freight that would have taken maybe a month and a half to 2 months is now taking 3 months to 4 months. And it means there's a lot of the backers are understanding about that. They understand that everything is delayed. And that's a big part you'll see right now. But the big thing that the audience isn't seeing is that, yes, everything is delayed, but also everything is like double the cost too. So normally booking, just like whatever pallets, it's just exponentially more. And so you have to be more careful. And sometimes that means you're ordering less product, which ultimately means you're not doing what you needed to do long term. So yeah, big takeaways. Don't charge your shipping in the current campaign, at least in the current setting. They're saying 2025 before everything's back to normal in terms of regular freight. And that's probably going to help get things back. But that's still 3 years from now, right?
Yeah, that's a long time.
That's a long time. And I mean, books will be a bit more expensive. Normally, these 5th edition books are averaging 50. Now we're starting to see $60 because the price of paper has gone up. So a lot of it's budgeting, a lot of it's numbers. I know people don't like dealing with those numbers, but also if you're dealing with
spreadsheets,
role-playing game content, if you're building role-playing game content, you should be playing with a lot of numbers already anyways. But trust me, every time I talk to a creator that we're helping publish or do stuff, it's like, show me your spreadsheets, show me what you've got. And then we go through a breakdown of like, here are all your fees, here are all the things. Here's the estimate of what one pallet might cost you versus shipping 50 pallets. And then so people can get an idea of what their costs will go into a campaign and then know what their price break-even points is when they offer their stretch goals. They know they're not overcommitting themselves, and at least when it comes to production side of things.
Very cool. Very, very good advice. I just have one or two more questions and then we can kind of wrap up. So one question I had for you, and I think this is actually a massive growing trend, and I think that we'd be remiss not to talk about this, is your Patreon campaign. And how does Patreon interface with your business model? Like, how does that fit into your overall business, and how does that kind of combine with the campaigns you're doing on Kickstarter?
So Patreon's interesting. It's a really cool space because it allows you to be more experimental with what you're creating, at least when it comes to what we're building. Because when it comes to a Kickstarter, those are a bigger deal. That's a huge 200-page book, and it's taken a few years to develop. And there's a lot of art, there's a lot of writing, a lot of editing. When it comes to content that we're producing for a Patreon, I find that we're able to communicate with the audience and say, hey, we want to try to create a boss monster, and engage with how that's how they run their campaign, how you can quickly include that in your campaign. And it's a lower ask in terms of the amount of time and build required, but allows us to have like little measurable successes in between our big projects and still engage with audiences in a way where they feel like they have some kind of way to dictate some of the content that's being created. If they like what's being built there, if they're not, it's a great way to experiment with the cool stuff that your company might be able to provide.
It's also really great, like recurring income. You guys have like 900, a little bit over 900 patrons, right? And they're supporting you on a monthly basis. So, I mean, that helps a lot, I assume, compared to once in a while projects.
Yeah. So it's great about those is that like, because we'll have our big projects like our Humblewoods or our Hecknas and whatnot, and we'll have a lot of time building into those. But if we can, over time, release a bit of content in the Patreon, see how people are seeing or see what they think of that stuff, they're helping fund those projects on a long-term basis. And they get the benefit of having the content first. And maybe like with our Patreon, we actually release physical little booklets with it, which is something no one else gets. So they get this like little extra perk, and they allow us to fund projects that may not be something we would have focused on had we not had the Patreon.
Very exciting, man. This is so cool. I'm sure this has been a lot of work getting this together over the years and doing these epic campaigns and obviously growing your Patreon, these different things. So it's really cool to hear how you've sort of evolved, right, over the years and now growing to, I think you said 20 employees or thereabouts. Very exceptional. So my final question for you here is, when it comes to your journey specifically as an entrepreneur, do you feel like you've learned anything that you feel like you want to pass on to the audience, or that you feel like would be beneficial to someone else who maybe is trying to one day have a team?
And I think you may have seen this as I talk about like how I got to this step. Was Hit Point Press wasn't the first company. It wasn't the second, it wasn't the third. It was probably more like the 12th or the 13th company. And in terms of like building and trying to create and developing things, the first 10 attempts didn't pan out, or they panned out in different ways, but not in the same way that Hit Point Press did, or like the card accessory company or the agency did. But it was because of those years of experience of trying to collaborate and build an experiment that I was able to and build and create these companies. It's not going to be an overnight success. Like I said, I ended graphic design in 2008, and Hit Point Press was funded in 2019. And so there's 11 years there of me doing tons of freelance and trying to build my own things at the same time while getting to this point. So I know a lot of people want to create a project and be like, oh, there are $1 million Kickstarters out there. Well, I'm going to make my own book. It's going to be $1 million Kickstarter. Start small, start with a small project. Try to get a $5,000 Kickstarter, maybe a $10,000. Build up your audience. Find ways to talk to people. It's going to take time. It's not going to be an overnight success. There are people, yes, they will have those overnight successes, but that's a drop in the bucket.
Love it, man. Where can people go to learn more about your recent project and any new ones that are coming out?
So hitpointpress.com, that's our site. You'll see all the new releases and all the various cool books that were coming out this year. In terms of socials, at Hitpoint Press on almost every platform that you can think of. So you can check us out there if you want to engage with us in that way. You'll find links to our Discord as well. We also have 2 projects that we are helping publish and collaborate on. One is Tales from Sina Una, which is currently live now, has 5 days to go. It's on Kickstarter. And in a couple weeks, there is another campaign called Lore of Athera, Dark Symmetry from the Alchemy RPG guys. And that one's going to be a blast. So be sure to check that one out.
Awesome, man. We can end on this note. My final question is if you can speak directly to the listeners, and we can end on either a positive word of encouragement. It could be a quote that you'd like. It could be something that you wish you told people. One theme I'm just taking away from the interview is just the theme of persistence. Anything you want to kind of end on, and we can end on that note.
I think part of it is like a lot of these creators are going to be having regular day jobs and a lot of things they're going to be working on. It's just a matter of managing your time, and a big part is managing burnout. Like I said, it's going to take time. But as long as you love what you're doing, or you love what you're creating, or you have an idea of, and you think you're building an audience that loves and engages with you, that's a great start. As long as you keep with it and are able to get people to either join your Patreon or back a small campaign, that's how some of the greatest projects are made, and greatest companies is like they've started doing that. And it is work. It's going to be a lot of work, but you can do it.
Love it. Awesome, Ricardo. Thank you for coming on the show. Really appreciate it, and look forward to your next campaign.
No problem. I appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Crowdfunding Demystified podcast. Again, my name is Salvador Briggman. Hope you enjoyed today's podcast episode. You took away some good stuff, some good vibes, and also some good strategy and information, right? When it comes to doing your crowdfunding campaign, something that's useful and practical for you. That is my number one wish when it comes to putting out this free content to educate the community, to help bring good training and information advice to the world. That's kind of what my passion is. And I hope that you enjoyed that. And if you did, please give a positive rating and review on iTunes if you are listening to this there. One of the things that I was thinking about recently, so in Miami, I've been getting into a lot of outdoor activities and outdoor sports. And I was kayaking the other day, and I was actually learning a lot more about like kayaking strokes. And for the longest time, when I was younger, I would always be kayaking that would tire out my arms. You're doing a long kayaking trip, like you're doing it just for like an hour or two, and your arms get totally tired out, right? By the end of it, it's like, oh my gosh, I can barely lift my arms, and it's so bad. And then I was listening to this one instructor, and they were saying how when you're kayaking, you should actually be using your core. So I actually shifted my entire stroke, a kind of method, if you will, when I was kayaking. And then after an hour, I was no longer tired. I was still going, man. I had so much energy. I wasn't tired out. And what I realized was that for most of my life, I was freaking kayaking wrong. But sometimes you don't realize that. Sometimes things are more hard or more difficult than they should be. And you just don't understand because you haven't had access to someone who tells you that. You don't have a trainer. You don't have someone who comes to you and is like, hey, this coach is saying you got to do it this way. Your stroke is wrong. If you do it this way, it's going to be so much better. So that was kind of like a light bulb moment for me, which is that sometimes your success is limited by the quality of information which you have access to. And sometimes as well to the individuals which you have access to. This is something that's been to me like a hallmark in my life, because every time I've had access to higher caliber and more successful people, I've learned way more. And that's one of the reasons why in 2015, I started this podcast, was that so you can be a fly on the wall and really listen to these success stories and learn along the same time, right? What's working for them, stuff that's very difficult to get access to, this quality of information education. So I do hope that you value that. But in addition, if you do value your success, if you value your campaign, if this is something that you're ready to invest in and you really want to do this right, I have a great option for you, which is really, in my opinion, one of the best things which you can do leading into a campaign, and that's to get an expert opinion. So if you're interested, I do these one-on-one intensive coaching calls with my students. I also do long-term coaching. I also do group coaching. I do a bunch of different types of coaching. I have different courses out there, I have books. I also help one-on-one with execution occasionally if I really believe in a project, but there's a bunch of different stuff that I do. However, these one-on-one coaching calls are literally, in my opinion, like this is one of the best things that creators typically take away when it comes to their campaign, because it's almost like within this intensive coaching call, you're getting so much valuable feedback in a very short period of time. In the same way that if you might go in for like an alignment when it comes to your spine, you can really walk out of that thing and you can very quickly understand what you got to do going forward in order to improve your campaign. Sort of your problem areas, the things you should be working on, the step-by-step procedures going next, things you might not even realize. And I would say that, to be honest, when it comes to crowdfunding, what you don't know can actually cause you to not be successful. Sometimes you just don't know what's around the next bend. You don't know what you don't know. Like there's that saying that's out there. And sometimes that's what actually can hold you back. And if you just had a couple of different tweaks, if you had like a golf swing or something like that, you can be soaring with your ball and it can be going in the right direction, versus if you didn't have those tweaks, maybe it's going to go into a pond, right? It's going to go into the forest or something like that. Probably me if I'm doing golf. But this is one of the things that's so important. And that's really why I make myself available to my audience. So if you want to learn more about this, you can go book a one-on-one coaching call with me. Just fill out a little bit of information about what you're trying to do, what you're trying to accomplish. And I promise you, this is literally one of the best investments which you will ever make when it comes to launching something new into the world. Go to the link at crowdcrux.com/coaching. That link is crowdcrux.com/coaching, crowdcrux.com/coaching, and you can book a one-on-one intensive coaching call with me. Thank you so much, man, for listening wherever you are in the world, whatever it is you're doing. I hope that you enjoyed today's episode, and I will see you next time.